evening. Right now, Metro Police are desperately searching for the person or people responsible for killing a man and a woman.
I got a male down in the middle of the street.
Breaking news now, a triple shooting leaves 2 dead.
Never expect for somebody to tell you your loved one was murdered.
This Labor Day will mark 42 years that have haunted the St. Cloud family.
30 years. 30 years this family has waited for answers.
A couple months go by, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you really start to struggle with the idea that the case might not get solved and that somebody might get away with murder.
It's very unfortunate that we have any cold cases at all, and certainly unfortunate that we have as many as we do. And that's why Ryan's work and the work of Project Cold Case is so important.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ryan Backman with Project Cold Case. This is Katie Jeffries, First Coast News.
Hi. Good to be here.
Yeah. What's going on the holidays at the news station?
Not a lot, actually, thankfully, knock on wood. A lot of people on, vacation, in and out, so kind of quiet at the station.
That's interesting. So I guess we kind of feel like news is never quiet.
I guess relatively for
relatively
me.
Quiet.
Compared to the summer when it's always wild.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thanks for coming out again today.
Good to be here.
We're talking about a case that is one of the original in your series. In the first set of 5 that we ever did, this was one of those cases. This is one of the originals. So we'll talk a little bit later about the evolution of this series that you've done. But we're going to talk about Crandall Jack Reed. He went by Jack today. He was killed November 16th, 2007. So it's over 12 years ago now. We did a spotlight as Project Cold Case on this in January 2016, and then you did the feature in May of 2017. So, as we mention every time we're on here, if a case doesn't get solved, it doesn't mean we're going to stop featuring it and trying to get it back out there into the public.
Right.
This is one that when you originally did it, investigators said they had information. So that hasn't led to an arrest yet, and we want to put this back out there so that whatever information is needed to push it over the edge so that it can lead to an arrest, we want to see that happen as soon as possible.
That's right. We interviewed, it was Jack Crandall Reed, his wife Terry, who we interviewed for the story, and even she knew about the tip, and so she was kind of anxious, hoping something would happen, even 3 years ago, and unfortunately there just has not been an arrest.
Hasn't been an arrest. Let's roll the video that you did back in 2017. And see, that'll catch people up to date. This is interesting because you had some decent footage from when it happened.
Yes, we had actual archive video, which you never know. With some of the cases we have it, some of the cases we don't. And this one we actually had quite a bit of archive video, and actually an interview with Terry from back when it happened.
Yeah.
So we could kind of juxtaposition the two.
Yeah. Well, let's watch, and then we'll talk more about the case.
Case that has yet to be solved, the case of Crandall Reed. He served our country for 20 years and survived Desert Storm. But on November 16th of 2007, he was shot to death inside his taxi cab. So continuing her cold case series tonight, Katie Jeffries has more for us.
He was an honest man trying to make an honest living. That's what Terry Reed had to say about her husband. But he was shot to death inside of his taxi cab in November of 2007. A cold-blooded killing. And Terry has been searching for answers for nearly 10 years.
There ain't no more out there like him. He was the only gentleman I ever knew.
Time has done little to numb the pain for Terry Reed. Before driving a cab, her husband Jack served in the U.S. Navy for 20 years, survived Desert Storm, but lost his life in a spray of bullets near the Boy Scouts of America building off Edgewood Avenue.
And I think they said he shot 21 bullets. One hitting him.
Somehow, he was able to drive away, but crashed into this convenience store parking lot and died.
I don't understand why. Why him? Because you want to rob somebody because you're too lazy to go to work?
Terry Reed has her husband's urn topped with a brownie her granddaughter said Jack should have since it was his favorite snack. She has a bear made from one of his favorite sweatshirts. But what she doesn't have is an arrest or conviction in her husband's murder.
You're taking this life off of this earth. That's somebody's son, father, brother, uncle, grandfather, and you don't care. You do it so cold-blooded.
JSO's cold case unit is working this case.
That case is active. We're looking at it right now.
And says it does have some new leads.
Now, we're following up on some tips and leads in that particular case. I can't talk to the details of that particular case either because it's an active one, but I feel promised about it.
I want to know who did it, and I can't rest until I do. You know, I have to have peace too.
So we will keep you updated if there are any developments in this case. If you know anything tonight, you're asked to call Crime Stoppers or the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. That number to Crime Stoppers, 866-845-TIPS. Remember, your call can remain.
All right, so there's the story from over 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago now. Yeah. You know, the things that stuck out to me was, you know, he was a Navy veteran.
Right.
He had been on the USS Saratoga out here, I guess based out of Mayport, which was a aircraft carrier, you know, when he was in the military. You know, doing some research online, there's like a U.S. Navy website that somebody had created a page for Crandall Jack Reed about knew he had passed away, posted the stories about his murder and it being unsolved, but was asking people to upload pictures if they had them from when they were traveling around, nice. On tours. And he was involved with Desert Storm, you know, and so here's one of our you know, Navy veterans that had come home, retired after 20 years in the service, got a job at a cab company.
Yeah, just making an honest living.
Yeah. It was, you know, obviously it's got to be the worst shift for a cab driver, the overnight shift. You know, you never know what you're getting at, you know, in the middle of the night. But this was like 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. And he had apparently pulled behind like the Boy Scouts of America building over on Edgewood. And I, you know, assume he was waiting for his next fare. And somebody pulled up and tried to rob him. And he obviously opened fire on him, and he took off in the car and was able to drive the short distance down the street. And
it sounds like, especially hearing it from Terry, you know, 21 shots is what she was thinking. So that's a spray of bullets. Yeah. That's a lot of gunfire in that area. Unfortunately, he was hit and he couldn't go very far. Yeah. And police responded. He was basically still in his car bleeding, and then they transported him to the hospital. And he was pronounced deceased at the hospital. And you know, going back through some of the old news stories, there was some witnesses, they felt like, that, you know, that had seen stuff. There was, at least in one report I saw, there was a description, you know. I mean, so there were leads.
There were leads, and it you know, case went cold. You know, has now been cold for 12 years. And so the idea, though, is if you've got information somewhere, that's when coming forward really helps, because somebody that comes forward now is going to say something that does reflect in that case file from back then, you know, and tie it together. And it's not just going to be a random tip. It will actually be something of value, you know. So we really want people to share this and share the story, so that hopefully one of those tips can come in and be enough to finally get this case you know, resolved and an arrest made.
And even if it's something you just heard through the grapevine, you know, officers still want that type of information. And you can see, I mean, in the story, Terry still has his urn, she still has all the photos, you know, he still is very much in her heart, and she wants some resolution to this. I
found a quote from her on one of your old, I don't think this was in the story, but it was an old story that First Coast News had done when she had been interviewed, you know, prior. And she said, you know what, this time it was my husband, next time it could be yours. I don't want his death to go unnoticed. I want to know who did it, and I can't rest until I do. I have to have peace too. That was back then. I mean, that was back in 2007. Those were the quotes that she was saying then. And, you know, you talked to her a couple years ago. We talked to her off and on and kind of check in with her. she still feels that way. I mean, you know, anybody that thinks that, you know, after 12 years, you know, she's moved on and doesn't care, you know, that's not the case. Like, she still really, really wants answers. So, you know, hopefully we can help that. You know, Crime Stoppers is the way to give any tip that you have, any information.
1-866-845-TIPS.
Yeah.
Know it by heart.
Yeah, that's right. You will remain anonymous, and there will be a $3,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest in that case. So anybody out there that's that has information, and we were talking, like, even if you have information that law enforcement already has, one, you may not know if they have it or not, but two, that confirms things that are in those case files. You know, you've got different detectives now 12 years later. You know, there may be something in there that somebody said, but they couldn't prove. And if they have a second witness that can corroborate that story, then it solidifies that case.
And sometimes it's just good. You never know. Maybe you talking to that detective helps ring some memory bell of something they saw in the case file. You know, it never hurts to always bring what you know back to the forefront in an investigation. Absolutely.
Clint, do we have some pictures too? We didn't have very many pictures, but we had, you know, this was obviously the taxi at the scene, the cab that was being towed away, and you know, I'm sure, you know, that's a terrifying.
Yeah, you can see it. I think you can almost see some of the bullet holes maybe in the sides of the car.
Yeah. This is from that website that the guy created. It's one of his Navy buddies. This was them on deployment somewhere when they would go out on for a night out on the town,
just having a few drinks with
having a few drinks with friends. You know, but I thought it was cool that a friend of his, had, you know, taken the time and made the effort to make a website to try to remember.
Yeah, it shows he was a good guy. He was cared about.
Exactly. Those were images, you know, from the house from Terry, with the picture of him in uniform, his flag, and then the bear that was made for him. I can't remember if it was his favorite shirt or sweatshirt.
I think it was his favorite sweatshirt.
Yeah. So, but, you know, those were just some of the pictures that we received, and I mentioned this to you before we started. Give us a little bit of the behind the scenes look for you. You know, what it's like to set these up when you meet these families. Is there anything that sticks out to you, like, that's common between most of them? Is there something, you know, just your perspective as being vested interest? It's your community, it's you know, where you live too, and you're out there telling these stories, and you get to see a side of people that, you know, is not something that every survivor actually shows, because, you know, the first thing you don't say is, hey, my loved one was murdered, when you meet somebody, you know. So what's it like to go to Terry's house or meet up with her and have a conversation?
I think one of the things that you see across the board when you interview the survivors is that they still can remember every detail of how they found out, of the days surrounding it. That still is very much a fresh memory for them, and it can be hard to talk about, and it's frequent that, you know, they cry, which is understandable, or even talking about their loved one is hard, but I know that I can tell they feel it's very important, because they want their memory preserved in a good way, because you know, just because they died tragically does not mean that should reflect on their entire life.
Exactly.
They had a whole life before they got to that point. So I always like to try and sit down and start usually by talking about the good times, the happy memories, and then we kind of work our way into, okay, tell me about how you found out, what happened, you know, what is justice to you. And I think that is different for every family. Some families want an arrest, some families just want closures. Some say, like, there's no way of ever getting justice at this point. But it, you know, I know that it's very hard for people to talk about it, so I don't ever want to step on their toes and make it more difficult than it needs to be. So usually we block out as much time as needed, and take it as slow as
You've had some long interviews, you know, before, and it's interesting because a lot of times, you know, once you get them started, you know, it's obviously it's a hard topic to talk about, because they miss them and they love them and they've been taken, but they love to share the stories, and they love, you know, the idea that somebody cares enough to listen, you know. And so I've seen it where, you know, you start asking those questions, and then the interview, or the conversation. Sometimes it's not even the interview. It's like starts with a conversation. You haven't even got the camera set up yet. You haven't got.
You're like, wait.
Yeah. Don't get too far into it. But yeah, I mean, I've obviously sat in the room on a number of these stories that you've done, and with the families, and I've had my own interviews with you in the past, and it is always, a lot of families want to have their loved one on TV and make sure that the rest of the community sees them and knows that they're alive. And that is an exciting time. And then when the camera walks in and you walk in, and the microphone, then all of a sudden there's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to, and so I know a lot of times you'll say things, like, this is not live. We can edit.
Yeah, you can always stop and restart. And I don't believe there's a wrong answer. It's not a quiz. It's just, tell me how you remember your loved one. Tell me your favorite memory. What were they like? What do you want the community to know about them? The people watching this story who never met Jack, what do you want the community to know about him? And that he was a Desert Storm veteran, that he was a good man making an honest living. And so I think those are the details that make them, because so many people in the community, you don't know everybody in the community, but I feel it's the little details that make a person real, almost to a viewer, to connect with that person.
Right. Well, and we've talked about it in the past that, our goal here is to make people that haven't been affected, relate and
understand why
care.
This is important.
Yeah, and somebody has information, why should you care? Well, because this was just, Jack was everybody's neighbor. It was everybody's friend, but he was somebody's husband and son, and so, when you make them real, then somebody hopefully that has information, it's not as easy for them to just ignore the fact that they haven't come forward. That's the goal, at least.
They sit back and see, like, this was a good person that this happened to. They still have loved ones wanting answers, and if you hold that answer, you hope to hit that little sense of guilt, of conscience, that you should say something.
Yeah, and when you see somebody sees a picture of Jack and they go, oh, he's, he reminds me of my coworker or my cousin or my brother or whatever it is. Then maybe they're going to be willing to share the segment, share the story, and again, the hope is that we're going to reach somebody that way, and that they'll come forward, and this is a case that can be solved. We've been told that, from everybody.
I think that was the last line of the story, that this was a promising case.
Yeah.
So I know that Terry, of course, was really hoping to see this closed, and it has been 2.5 years. Since our story aired.
Segment, and 12 years since it happened. So, maybe this is the push and the motivation. We hope so. We've talked the last couple of weeks. We've had a number of people make comments on our Facebook page about having information on cases, and we've directed them to the right place. We've had a couple of cases that aren't local, but that have been arrest has been made in those cases recently. We just got word of another one the other day. So, and that one was, information out there. It was a 10-year-old case. It was the anniversary. People were putting information out there on social media, and somebody called law enforcement with what was described as an innocuous tip, but it basically gave them a new direction to look,
and it was the right direction.
So
there you go.
It's not all about fancy technology sometimes, and genealogy and DNA, although that stuff obviously
pointing them
helps.
in that right direction, even if you don't know specifically who the person that pulled the trigger was. But if you were in the area and maybe you saw a description of a car, but you didn't want to say anything because you didn't want to get involved, but it's gone unsolved for this long, it's time to speak up.
Yeah, that's it. And, as far as like Jacksonville cases go, we've had some comments recently about most of the stories we share are Jacksonville or Northeast Florida, and people that know us know why, because that's where we're based out of. That's where your station is. Those are the cases that we have connections to get more publicity. But those aren't the only cases that we work on here at Project Cold Case. But that's kind of the reason why a lot of times you'll see a heavier presence of Florida cases or Northeast Florida cases is simply because we're here. People have access to us.
Yeah, and I have had people reach out to me on various social media asking to cover their loved one, but they don't live in our viewing area. Unfortunately, if I can't cover a case that's outside of our viewing area because, I work at a Jacksonville TV station. So the stories that I cover have to be within our viewing area.
And we can always try for those families to reach out to the
media
station, and we encourage them as individuals to reach out to your local reporters.
Most have crime reporters.
Yeah, and Twitter is an unbelievable access to reporters in your area. Get on Twitter, follow your local investigative crime reporter, and then send them a private message and
I think
DM
you'll find
them
that you get a positive response, especially if you can send them a note maybe coming up around the anniversary of something, or if you have a vigil or something going on. That helps add more of so they can pitch it to be like, well, it's been 10 years since, because of course they have to pitch it to their producers.
Right, exactly.
It's been 10 years since this occurred. I've spoken to a family member. They want to bring this up, and then usually, you can get your story.
Yeah, how it is. Cold cases are a popular thing right now. It's not hard to pitch them if you've got something.
If you've got a family member, somebody that will talk to you.
Family member that will talk. You've got something that you can kind of spin the story around, whether it's the time of year, a new tip, anything like that. Anniversaries are the perfect time because it's an easy excuse to put it out there.
Right.
But these stations, at least right now, are more than willing typically to do something involved with cold cases. So we always tell those families, create these partnerships. That's what we did. You know what I mean? And it's worked out to benefit a lot of families in our area. And we encourage everybody to reach out and do that because it's important for those communities and those families as well.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to, even if a reporter, there are some cases that I covered years ago where I was there at the initial crime, and I still talk to those family members, and I check in here and there, or they'll send something to me if they heard of something happened. So don't be afraid to send them another message, a follow-up message, even if you already talked to them maybe a year ago. It never hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key right there is to be involved and advocate for your loved one's case because you guys have a job to do that doesn't allow you to focus on one story
it's hard.
Forever, but it doesn't mean that you're not willing to revisit a story, down the road. It doesn't mean that that news stations aren't absolutely willing to put stories out there. I think sometimes it's just a little hard for families to make that initial step in fear of rejection and fear that that they won't be able to do it. But I think the odds are in your favor that if you're willing to talk about your loved one's case and it's around an anniversary or some kind of significant date,
I think you'll have better luck than you think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think and if they say no,
then
you
a different
try.
Person.
Yeah, ask a different station, ask a different person, and that you've tried. And again, sometimes with these families, what I tell them is, as long as what I want is I want you, when you look in that mirror, when you go to bed at night, to know that you have done all you can do.
Right.
Because there's a lot of things that are out of our control and investigations, and there's a lot of things that we just, if we can't control if somebody's willing to come forward with a tip. We can't control what physical evidence was left at the scene. We can't control, technology and how fast it's advancing and what it can do. But one thing you can control is what you do for your loved one's case, and that's reaching out.
If you talk to a reporter, that reporter, they're going to have to ask law enforcement about the case and get. So then, you kind of bring it back up to law enforcement as well by way of the news.
Yeah.
And like I said, if one person tells you no, ask another, because there's multiple news stations in every market. There's print media. There's so many different avenues.
And social media now is such an avenue to share these stories and get the word out and remind people. And once you get it in one of those, if you get it on the TV, in the local news, you can share that story forever. You don't have to wait. We encourage families all the time. Reshare. Who cares that it aired a year ago, 2 years ago? That's what we're doing.
That link
what I
again.
mean? We're sharing that story again 2.5 years later because nobody is going to complain about that product being put back out there, and the family is not going to complain about more exposure for their loved ones. So, but it doesn't have to be us. It can be, the individuals.
And it's good if you have a good relationship with someone in the media in your town, because I think it was Missing Children's Day that came up a while ago, and just another reporter was doing a missing children's case, and I heard him talking about it, and I was like, do you need a family? Yeah. I know several families of missing children's, and they wanted to talk to him, of course. So, and that was just another way to get that family's case back on the air again.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's,
So you'll find they'll trade, the more reporters, they'll trade your information to help get your story out there more.
And one thing I've seen too is, you've been in this market for a while now, and but when you came into this market, you had stories that you had done in other places that you hadn't done here, that you enjoyed back then. So sometimes we get calls from, a newer reporter to the area, and they're saying, hey, when I lived in Texas, I did a story on X, and I was hoping to do something on that, here, and so you never know. But there's, you guys are always looking for stories. Your station
news never stops.
The news never stops, and you're going to be putting something on TV from 5 to
5 to 6, and then 11, and then
So there's content there, that can be filled, and I know fear of rejection can be tough, especially when people already think that their loved one maybe isn't important, and the community's forgotten, law enforcement has forgotten, but I think you'll be surprised that there are people out there that want, and it doesn't have to be, the traditional high profile cases. No. Like we pick cases based on families' willingness to speak on camera.
They all matter. They all
absolutely
do.
Every single one of them. And we've done cases where families wouldn't come on camera or didn't come on camera, but
still had the support.
But had the support. And that's kind of key, is if a family wants to tell the story, that's so valuable.
If you're going to reach out, somebody has to be willing to go on camera, because that's going to be, of course, one of the key pieces is you need to hear from somebody who knew the person. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Katie, got big holiday plans?
Oh man, not too much. I'm staying in town. My parents are here now, so
no more traveling to the cold.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
That's good. Well, we appreciate you coming in again today, helping us again get more information out there on Jack Reed, and hopefully the next time you see us talking about his case, it will be to talk about an arrest.
Overjoyed to hear that.
That would be huge. So, heck of a holiday gift if somebody out there can provide that information that would lead to that. It would be great. Again, Crime Stoppers is 866-845-TIPS, and you can remain anonymous. You will remain anonymous, and there's a $3,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest. Yep. So that's not an arrest and conviction. Sometimes convictions can take a while, but an arrest, if they can make an arrest on that, you'll have the money within, I think Wiley told us, within a month of the arrest happening.
And it's easy. You pick it up. You don't have to give your name. You just give your Crime Stopper number, not even your name, and you just walk out with that money.
Out of there with the money. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Katie, for joining us today. Hope you have a great holiday if we don't see you.
Thank you. You too.
Oh, you got the big...
the Emmys are coming up Saturday.
This Saturday. So we talked about that last time. You're nominated for the hour-long segment that you did. Yeah. On Unsolved with
several of the cases.
So we will have fingers crossed, and we'll be ready to report on that win.
I'll be posting Saturday night. If we win, trust me, I will post it, and I'll send you a text.
You're going down for the award, so good luck, travel safe, and definitely text me.
I will.
All right, thanks for joining us today. We'll show the remembrances from victims of this week, and we'll check in with you next week, where we're going to have a survivor come join us and sit down and talk about holidays when you've lost a loved one to violence. So thanks a lot. We'll see you then.